Okay, it's great to be back, and thank you all for joining us tonight again. So most of you have been with us for some or most of the class so far, the series, and welcome all newcomers. So just a brief introduction to what we're doing. We're going to do very brief, but what we spoke about in the first class was the idea that the concept of self-development is actually extremely central to the Jewish mission, to our purpose in the world, at least according to many commentators and many and certain traditions. You can say, like, you throw out a big question like that, like what's our purpose in the world, or what's the Jewish mission, and you could probably get different answers. But one mainstream approach is that God put us on this earth in order to bestow goodness to us, and the greatest goodness that we can experience is God himself, and to create a relationship with God and a closeness to God. And one of the ways that we can create a close relationship, and this is true with people as well, and certainly with God, is if we are similar to, or certainly with people, and true with God as well, if we make ourselves similar to God, then the more similar that two people are, the closer that they can become to each other. And along the same lines, if we make ourselves similar to God, so then there's the opportunity for closeness. So the Torah actually instructs us that we should walk in God's ways. And this is, as the Talmud explains, it's a commandment to emulate God, emulate his attributes, his kindness and his mercy. And that's done through developing our character. Then we can, when we really develop our character, when we really change ourselves, so then we can make ourselves similar to God and develop a closeness. So it's very central. And one of the, we throughout the course, when we talk about a certain trait, so we will offer different strategies for how we can achieve that trait, how we can develop it, how we can grow in that character trait. But ultimately, the one running strategy that is true throughout any trait that we'll deal with, any midah, any attribute that we want to work on, is simply the study of Musar, the study of self-development. Because when we study it, and when we review it, and when we think about it, so then we are mindful of it in our daily life. And our week, hopefully, if we've learned about a certain, we spent a lot of time talking about humility and arrogance, and hopefully when we learn about it, we're thinking about it. And when we think about it, so then different scenarios present themselves, and we say, oh, I was just learning about that, and what's a proper way to respond? And once we respond properly once or twice or three times, then all of a sudden it's second nature to us, and that means we've accomplished our goal. We've changed ourselves. So besides for the different strategies that we present throughout the class, but just the study of Musar itself is the greatest strategy to develop various traits within ourselves. So as I said, we spent a lot of time talking about humility and arrogance, and I think we had, this is the 9th class, so we spent about 6 classes discussing, after the introduction, discussing those traits. Now we're going to try to move on a little bit, but it's really just an offshoot of those traits. The title of tonight's class is Anger Problem, Speak to the Manager. We'll try to understand that title as we go. So it was shortly after World War II, and there was a new Talmud that had been published, a new set of Talmud. It was the same Talmud, it was just a new edition. Beautiful new edition. It was called the Scholzinger edition. And the great Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was one of the first to procure for himself a Scholzinger Talmud. And Rabbi Feinstein had many of his own novel thoughts on the Talmud, which he would write into notes and develop into classes, but he also kept notes on the margins of his Talmud, as many people do. And in those days, what he used to write? He used a fountain pen. So he had an inkwell on his desk, and he would fill up his pen from that inkwell and write his notes in the margin. Well, one day he was away from his desk, and one of his students, actually a close student of his, was passing by his desk and was very curious to see what was Rabbi Feinstein writing, on the page of Talmud that they were currently studying. What kind of novel ideas would he find in the margin of Rabbi Feinstein's Talmud? And he went over to take a look. And as he leaned over this brand new, beautiful set of Talmud, all of a sudden, he accidentally spilled that little jar of ink that sat there all over this page of Talmud. It probably soaked through and got onto other pages as well. And obviously he was very embarrassed, and shocked and probably quite nervous and scared. And he stood there frozen, waiting until Rabbi Feinstein returned. And when Rabbi Feinstein came back, he saw what had happened. He took a look and he turned to this boy, the student, and he said, doesn't my Talmud look nice and blue? That was his response. Now, I don't know if I would have responded that way. I wish, I had that self-control. But Rabbi Feinstein commented many times later, in the future when this incident was brought up and people talked about it. And he always emphasized, whenever people spoke about this incident, that it took me years to develop myself to be able to do that. You don't think that I had a temper? I'm this great rabbi. You think I never had a temper? I had a temper like anyone else, but I worked on myself constantly. I worked on it and I learned how to control it. And when I was challenged, I was able to respond in the proper way. I think we can't really go on without recalling the story of we spoke about in the first week, when we spoke about assimilating the ideas of Musar, of self-development, about the fellow who has a role in the play. And his role is, he has one line. All he has to do is when the cannon goes off in the play, he has to say, "Hark, I hear the cannon roar." And he's practicing and practicing, "Hark, I hear the cannon roar." And it's his one line. It's not so hard, right? And comes the day of the play, and it's coming to his part, and all of a sudden the cannon goes off and it goes boom. And the man goes, "What the heck was that?" Because when we come to the actual moment, we can prepare our lines, right? We could prepare ourselves and try so hard to be able to say the right thing. But when the cannon goes off, then is it really a part of us is really the question. Have we assimilated our lines? Is it a part of us? Have we assimilated these traits that they become a part of us, that when that cannon goes off, when that inkwell spills on the table, on the Talmud, on our precious, possessions, what's our reaction? How do we respond? Do we have our lines straight and we say, oh, like Rabbi Feinstein, doesn't it look beautiful and blue? Or do we, go off on a tantrum or an angry yell or whatever it might be? So that's the challenge, and that's what we're trying to develop. So what we're going to do today is just sort of identify different categories of people with different temperaments based on the teachings of Pirkei Avot, of the ethics of the fathers, and some of the causes that may cause a person to respond in certain ways. And then hopefully next week we'll talk more about, first of all, why it's so futile to get angry, and actually very destructive for ourselves to get angry. And also we'll talk about some strategies for overcoming that, hopefully. Let's start with a quote from the Talmud. It's on the source sheet number 1. It's a famous quote. It's an amazing quote. And it's much better in Hebrew, so I'll also share the Hebrew with you so we understand the context. So Rabbi Eloi said that in 3 matters a person's true character is ascertained. We can learn about a person with just 3 things. And in Hebrew, there's a certain alliteration to it. In Hebrew, it's bikoso, bikaaso, bikiso, uvikaso. 3 things: koso, kiso, kaso. Now, those all sound the same. What do they mean? So koso means his cup. We can learn about him from his cup. Kiso is his wallet. We can learn about a person from his or her wallet. And kaso is his anger. So the three things that can teach us about a person, the essence, we can really ascertain who a person is, are based on their cup, their wallet, and their anger. And there's different ways to understand this, but just on the most simple level, it's very simple. The cup is the cup of wine. What happens when we drink? What comes out? As the Talmud says, when wine goes in, the secrets come out. The inner person. If a person is drunk and they become, all disgusting and they're mouthing off and saying things, and they get angry and all these things. So then it tells us something about what's inside. If a person gets drunk and they're happy and they're trying to make everyone joyous and good jokes and funny things and it's and they're nice and they're loving and they just want to hug everyone. So there's different ways that a person gets drunk, and it tells us about that person. The second is their pocket. How do they spend their money? So are they charitable? Are they honest in business? So we can learn a lot about a person, about how they deal with money. And the final one, which is what we're talking about, is their anger. How do they behave when they're angry, or do they get angry, right? And we'll see, everybody gets angry a little bit, and that's just human nature. But what happens when there's something that sets us off? What follows? Interestingly, one of the commentators takes all these three things and makes them into one scenario, which really is kind of like the scenario in the story with Rabbi Feinstein. One of the commentators, the Iyun Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Reischer, he suggests that the Talmud really is talking about one situation. You want to know how you can learn about someone? So see what happens. How do they react in the following scenario? They have a very expensive bottle of wine on the table, and someone is a guest, let's say, or even worse, it's their family member, it's their child, it's their spouse, right? And lo and behold, they accidentally, or they're clumsy, and they knock that expensive bottle of wine over, and it spills onto the tablecloth, it spills onto the floor, it leaves a mess. So what's the reaction? We have koso, we have his cup, we have his wine. We have kiso, we have his money. This is expensive. Now we want to see kaso, we want to see his anger. How does a person react in that situation? When the ink spills, when the wine spills, do we control ourselves, or are we, do we go ranting off at the person who did that? Are we forgiving? So that could be an indication of a person's character. And we can have many situations that demand from us to overcome our anger in our normal daily life. We're stuck in traffic. We're behind someone who's a really slow driver. We're waiting. We're at a restaurant and it's just taking so long for the food to come. Someone rear ends us while driving. All of these are different scenarios where they happen every day, and they test our patience. They test our control of our temper. And really, the way that we react in those situations is very telling about who we are. So let's take a look at the Mishnah, the teaching of our sages in Pirkei Avot and Ethics of the Fathers. This is the second source. It's in the chapter 5 of Pirkei Avos. You'll notice I put down 5, 11, and in parentheses 14. That's because in different versions, the Mishnahs are divided up differently. So in one version, it's number 11, and in another version, it's number 14. So the Mishnah says as follows. It says there are 4 kinds of temperaments that people have. The first that it lists, someone who is easy to become angry. They get angry easily, but they're easy to be appeased. So it passes. It's fleeting. The temper flares up, but they are able to calm down pretty fast. That's number 1. And the Mishnah says that that person's gain disappears in his loss. So it sounds like it's saying that even though there's something good here, which is that they can overcome and become appeased fast, but the loss overrides that. The destruction caused by that moment of anger, the gain disappears in the loss. There's more to be lost than to be gained here. Then there's someone who's hard to become angry and hard to be appeased. They don't become angry, but they very easily. But when they do, it's very hard to calm them down. So that's number 2. And that one, the Mishnah says that his loss disappears in his gain, meaning that at the end of the day, since it's rare that they become angry, so that's good. It may be that when they get angry, they're hard to be appeased, but ultimately, since it's very rare, so the positive trait of not becoming angry outweighs the negative trait of being hard to be appeased. Then it says that a person who is hard to become angry, hard to be angered, and easy to be appeased, that's a pious person. That's a chassid in the language of the Mishnah. That's the best, right? It's obvious, pretty obvious, that they're someone who is not angered easily, and if they do on a rare occasion become angry, they're easily appeased, they calm down pretty quickly. So that's the best. That's the pious person. And then the last is someone who angers easily, easy to become angry and hard to be appeased. Well, that's the wicked person. That's the Rasha. They get angry all the time, and when they get angry, all the time, they're hard to be appeased. They stay angry. They get angry and they stay angry. That's someone who's angry all the time, and that's really someone who you don't want to be around. So we should note that the Mishnah in the final 2, or let's talk about the last 2. We'll save the first 2 for later or for next week. I'm not sure if we're going to get to them so much. The last 2, hard to become angry and easy to be appeased. A pious person, a chassid in the language of the Mishnah. And easy to become angry and hard to be appeased, a rasha, a wicked person. Now, we learn something very fundamental from this, which is that you can only make those judgments and declare the Mishnah, that the sages can only say that someone is righteous or wicked as a result of their anger if we can control, if we have the ability to control ourselves and to overcome it. Someone might say, that's his temperament. What's he supposed to do? Right? That's how God created him or her. They're just an angry person. There's nothing they could do about it. So the Mishnah is saying it's not true. It's not true. There is something that we could do about it. This is something that a person can improve on. So to the point that the Mishnah says that you can either, as a result of how we control our temper, we can either be a righteous person, a pious person, or a wicked person. So it's in our control. That's very fundamental. Comment, question? No. Okay. I'm just going to mute everyone. Question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Is there a spectrum between the most wicked and the most pious? So you could be normally be at different spaces along that spectrum?
It's absolutely a spectrum, right? There's definitely a spectrum here, and everybody is different, and everybody gets angry differently. Yeah, certainly. Okay, any other comments? David, did you want to chime in? No? Okay. Fine. So now we sometimes will see, let's say a child gets angry and, a ferocious display of temper, and a relative will comment and they'll say, oh, he has his father's temper or his grandfather's temper, or, whoever it is, the great uncle, right? And it gives the impression, or it gives the child the feeling really, that their anger is inborn and it's a part of them. And it's not, it's not even theirs, it's their uncle's, it's the grandfather's temper. I just got stuck with it, right? What am I to do? But the Mishnah and our tradition in general teaches us otherwise. It says, no, that's not the case. We aren't, we don't just inherit these traits and in such a way that they, that there's no way it's biological, it can't be overcome. No, a person may be prone to certain tendencies, and right, or have certain tendencies towards anger or whatever it might be, and that's their test. That's really what that person has to work on overcoming, and with discipline of learning Musar and working on ourselves, then we can gradually free ourselves of that, even if we are that person who has a quick temper. Now, if I was writing this Mishnah, I would maybe add another line to it. We're missing one type of person, it seems, right? Who's missing here? Anyone? I would say there's 5 types of people. Yeah, Jill. Oh, you're still muted. I don't read lips.
Sorry. A person who doesn't get angry.
Thank you. Thank you. A person who doesn't get angry at all. So some of the commentators make this point, and they say, what do you see? You see that the sages don't have that expectation from us, right? They don't say, and the highest level is someone who doesn't get angry at all, right? In the words of the Midrash Shmuel, one of the commentators, he says, that's not someone who never gets angry. That's not a person, that's an angel. He says, even Moshe Rabbeinu, even Moses got angry. In the Torah, we have at least three examples where Moshe gets angry in the Torah. And Moshe, by the way, is the humblest of men. And we'll discuss further, but humility has a lot to do with controlling our temper. And yet, the humblest of men even got angry a few times. So he says that's not even that's not just a tzaddik, a righteous person, or a chassid, a pious person, right? He says that's a malach, that's an angel if you never get angry. So they're not they're not putting that expectation upon us. Now it happens to be that if you look in the Mesilat Yesharim, the path of the just, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto's great work on self-development, where he talks about the process of achieving really the highest levels of prophecy through step-by-step development. So when he talks about anger, he does talk about this level. He says there's an even higher level, which is that you never get angry. And as an example, he gives the great sage Hillel Hazaken, Hillel the elder, the great sage from towards the end of the Second Temple period, whose institute is the source for many of our traditions and laws in the Mishnah and the Talmud, and the Talmud recounts a story. We'll have the story at the end later in the class, but a story where Hillel was really challenged to someone was trying to make him angry, and he didn't, and Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, says this is the highest level, someone who doesn't get angry at all. But right here in this Mishnah, the implication is that we, everybody gets angry sometimes, and it's really a matter of how we deal with that moment, that flare, right, of that frustration or that aggravation when it hits us. Now, does it stay with us? How does it manifest itself? That's really going to be the key for how we want to develop ourselves. So in becoming such a person, the person who is hard to become angry, which is really the middle two, right? The middle two scenarios are both slow to anger, hard to be angered. So there's a very basic trait that we need to develop in order to, it's just the first step along the way. And in the words of Reb Shlomo Volbe, in source number 3, it's attainable to everyone. and that is tolerance. Tolerance. In Hebrew, it's savlanut, which is also a word for patience, but it's the ability to tolerate others. And that's the most basic trait that is the start of working on ourselves to be slow to anger. The truth is that earlier in the course, I really jumped the gun in a way, because when we were talking about humility, we talked about some really difficult situations to overcome. You know, we're insulted and we don't respond. We hold ourselves. We're criticized and we hold ourselves. That even so much more basic than that, forget about that. Just to be able to be in the same room as someone who's, you know, that just does things that irritate us. That's really the first step. And that's what Rabbi Volbe writes in his great work, Ale Shar. And he says, first of all, he points out that as I mentioned, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, is identified in the Torah as someone who is the most humble of people. And Rashi, in his commentary, the great medieval commentator Rashi, in his commentary on the word anav, which means humble, when he speaks about Moses, Rashi writes that it means he's shafal, which means lowly, he lowers himself, humble, and he's a savlan, which is this, he tolerates all the, for lack of a better word, the garbage, right? All the stuff that comes his way. But I'm not even necessarily talking about that. Forget about this, you know, just the idiosyncrasies of people. And there's all kinds of things that rub us the wrong way, or we have a pet peeve, right? And it shouldn't bother us necessarily, but sometimes it does. And the more that we allow those things to bother us, so then we start to get like hot under the collar. Actually, I remember once years ago hearing Rabbi Mordechai Becher speak. And Rabbi Becher, he's a prominent speaker in the Jewish world, on the speaking circuit, and he's much more funny than me. And he has an Australian accent, which means everything else. Everything sounds much funnier, also. So he once said that this was back in the day. Well, you'll see in a moment. Back in the day, he said the cause for all the world's problems is undershirt tags. Which, by the way, I think they've gotten rid of, you know, and at least my undershirts don't have tags anymore. But it used to be that they would put a tag on the back of the undershirt. And throughout the day, you know, it would start to scratch at the back of your neck a little bit and start to irritate you. And, you know, you'd start to like get a little rash there or something. And, you know, and as the day wore on, the person with the undershirt tag would be more and more irritated until, you know, somebody says something, right? He's so angry already from all the irritation of the undershirt tag. He said that's the cause for all the world's problems. But the truth is that this is sort of the point that Rabbi Volbe is making, is that really it starts with being able to deal with just the little things that shouldn't really bother us so much, and being able to tolerate them. So he writes, first of all, let's look back at number 3. Tolerance is attainable even for simple people like us. You know, you don't have to be the greatest, most humble person in the world to be able to have tolerance. Anybody can have tolerance for other people. This attribute in general is not in the realm of extreme piety, but rather a necessity for all relationships. Every single relationship that we have to be able to learn to tolerate the little things that may not be exactly how we would do things, or how we behave. We have to be able to tolerate that. He says that you can't create a relationship without tolerance. Just imagine, right? You know, let's say when you're younger, right? Your friends, you know, from school. And then as you get older, you have roommates, and if you go to yeshiva, you have chavrusas, you have study partners, and you have, or I guess in high school you have study buddies, and you have your classmates, and you have the person you sit next to on the bus, and then right, you advance into marriage and those types of relationships. You have to be able to tolerate those little things that you would do differently, or or you just act differently, or you think differently. And if you can't tolerate those little things, you can't have a relationship with anybody. It's the most basic need for any relationship, writes Rabbi Volbe. And he says, what is tolerance? And this is also in the source. What is tolerance? He says, a tolerant person is just like a person bearing a heavy load. It's interesting, as I said, the word in Hebrew for tolerance is savlanut. And the verb sovel is means to bear something. In fact, when it talks about the Jewish people enslaved in Egypt, so it says that I forget who I think it says about God. God saw, I may use this word a couple times, Vayar besivlotam. God saw their load. He saw them bearing this load. The same root, sivlotam. It means to bear something. So to tolerate is to be able to carry a load. So Rabbi Volbe really puts it, he creates some imagery for us. It's like he says, a person bearing a heavy load, even though it is heavy for him or her, he or she continues on their way and doesn't stop bearing it. Yeah, it may bother us, the way that this person speaks, or what they always put this thing away there, or whatever it is, right? My wife knows that my pet peeve is the way that she arranges the dishes on the drying rack when she washes the dishes, right? We have our pet peeves, right? If we let these little things bother us and, frustrate us and aggravate us, then we can't have relationships, and it builds. And if we allow these things to aggravate us, then it builds. And then the next thing that's a little bit more serious, right? All of a sudden we snap and we're angry. So the most basic first thing is to be able to tolerate those little differences. And you can't have a relationship with anyone really if you can't overcome that. If everything has to be my way or the highway, then you're not going to be able to have a relationship. And in fact, Rabbi Volbe, I saw this quoted in his name. I didn't see where he says it, but he says that, does anybody know what the Hebrew word for marriage is? Anybody know? The Hebrew word for marriage, I'm sure you know once I say it. I'm sure the Israelis here know. Nisuin is marriage. And also it comes from the same word, to be able to carry something, to bear something. We're not saying it's a burden to be married, but in a way, there's certain burdens that you carry. You have to be able to, willing to carry this load sometimes, to carry with you these tolerances, these differences. And unless we can do that, then we can't have a successful marriage. A nisuin, at its most basic level, involves just tolerating those differences. We can't assume that everybody else is going to change just to match exactly the way that we want them to be and how we imagine them. It doesn't work that way in life. If anything, right, we have to change ourselves to match the other person, if anything. And the sages really teach this in a more famous Mishnah, I think. This is number 4 on the source sheet, which is Yoshua ben Prachya from chapter 1 of Pirkei Avos. Rabbi Yoshua ben Prachya used to say, appoint for yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a friend, and judge all people with the scale weighted in their favor. Judge people favorably. 3 very important points. I want to focus on the second one. Acquire for yourself a friend. So let me ask you, and there's many interpretations of this Mishnah, but in light of what we said, what's the price to acquire a friend, right? It says, kinei lechachaver, means buy yourself a friend, acquire a friend. What's the price? How much does it cost to acquire a friend? So one of the great commentaries, the Chassid Yavetz, explains, you know what it costs? It costs a bit of ourselves. We have to be willing to align our traits and our desires with those of our friends, right? If it always has to be my way and we always have to go to the place that I want to go and do the things that I want to do, well, you learn this pretty early on actually in the schoolyard that they're not going to want to be friends with you anymore if the friend never gets to choose, right, what we're going to play. And it goes, it starts from a very young age, and it's true for adults as well, that that we have to be, in order to have a friendship, in order to have a relationship, we have to be able to we have to pay a little bit of ourselves. We have to, the price to acquire a friend is to give it up a little bit from ourselves and to be able to tolerate our differences and go with the flow. So that's really the starting point of trying to be difficult to be angered, hard to become angry. The two middle scenarios of the Mishnah, the very, very first point is something so basic, which is just to be able to tolerate those small differences and not let the pet peeves aggravate us to the point that we then get more angry and everything breaks loose. Okay. Now, looking at this pious person who is hard to anger and easy to be appeased. So those are two characteristics that are interesting to go together, because if I'm so pious that I'm hard to anger, so when do I get angry? When I have a really good reason to, seemingly, right? So if I have such a good reason to be angry, then why am I easy to be appeased? Those things seemingly don't go together so well. If I'm hard to anger, so that means I don't get angry from these little things. I don't, my undershirt tag doesn't aggravate me to the point that I'm ready to punch the next guy in the face on the train, right? That's not me. Only real things make me angry. So why would such a person also be easy to be appeased? And the answer, writes Rabbi Irving Bunim in his book Ethics from Sinai, his commentary on Pirkei Avos. He says that the answer is that this pious person is clearly making a conscious effort to be appeased. He actually says that grammatically in the Hebrew, the word is liratzot. It's not really to be appeased, but it's more like to seek appeasement, to seek peace, really, to make peace. And so there's really two parts to this. There's that he's slow to anger, but when that anger boils up and things become tense, so what do we do then? And it's such a good reason to be angry. Everybody thinks that, but we're talking about someone who it seems to be true for, right? It seems to be true. They rarely get angry. So there must be a good reason. So so why do they become appeased? The answer is because this person is seeking peace. That's the pious person. When we do flare up for a moment, what do we do then? Do we just, we say it's deserved, I'm going to go off on a tantrum, or we say, I'm going to deal with this peacefully. Now, we should point out, commentaries point out that there are situations where it is proper to become angry, especially from a religious perspective, to defend God's honor. Then there are scenarios where it's called upon, but we have to be very careful with that, because sometimes we think we're defending God's honor when really we're just defending our own honor, and it's a very fine line, and we have to be very careful with that. Sue, you have a comment or question?
I was going to say something kind of similar about why such a person who angers so rarely and only over very real things might be.
Wait, Sue, can you just lean forward a bit so you're closer to the microphone?
Yeah. I was going to say that if a person is very slow to anger, nor doesn't get angry at very minor things, but yet they can be easy to appease, it's probably because they're so, like you said, they want us to peace, but they're also willing to cool down, sit and talk through things which means they'll listen to the other person's point of view, even when they don't really agree with them, and try to put themselves in their place.
Good. Yeah, that's excellent. Right. And that's really a key, is to be able to put yourself in their place or give the benefit of the doubt. And that's right. That's absolutely key. Now, conversely, we have the one who's easy to become angry and hard to be appeased. So you'd say, again, we could ask the same type of question, just the opposite. If he becomes angry so easily, so it seems that he's getting angry at things that are really no reason to be angry about, right? Why is he becoming angry so much? And yet, you know, even though he's angry because whatever, you know, his toast was burnt or whatever it is, he's still hard to be appeased, right? And again, we sort of sense this conscious effort or desire to hold on to it and to make a fight out of it, and to just be what's the word? You know, to just always be, you know, not be willing to give in, and that's why we declare him a rasha, a wicked person, because it's someone who even at small things is not willing to try to work things out. So part of being pious and part of being righteous is that we not only are we slow to anger, but when we're angry, we do try to quickly resolve the matter. Now, why are the reactions of these two people so different? What is it about the pious person that makes him slow to anger and easy to be appeased? What is it about the wicked person? So many explain that, again, it comes back to humility and arrogance or ego. If the chassid, the pious person, is humble and doesn't demand or expect, you know, to be treated in any special way, and you know, if he encounters little irritations or insults in his daily life or her daily life, so they don't see that as you know, an affront to, you know, my great self-importance, right? How dare you, right? That's a stimulus for anger. But if we're humble and we don't expect to be treated like a king, so then we will be slower to react. These small things are not an affront to our self-esteem. But someone who has a big ego and is quick to anger, so then, or excuse me, someone who has a big ego will be quicker to anger, because they will always feel that their ego, they're being insulted, right? And how dare you, right, to do that to such a person and say that or act that way in my presence, and that's really at the root of it, is the humility versus the arrogant one. As we mentioned before, that Rashi comments that Moshe, who was, when the Torah says he was the humblest of men, so in explaining that, one of the things that he says was he is a savlan, he's someone who tolerates, and part of humility is to be tolerant and not see everything as an insult and an affront to us. Next, moving beyond the small things, right, that shouldn't bother us, but sometimes do. There are things that maybe are a little bit more insulting or upsetting or disruptive or uncomfortable, and maybe those are harder to overcome and more likely to bring about anger. And as an example, I mentioned earlier the story of Hillel, which is what we're going to look at now, and we'll see, the great wisdom of the Talmud, in recording the details of the story. And really, we can learn a lot about controlling anger, and also, what kinds of things might get our temper up, and that's really important, is to be aware of what kinds of situations could bring up anger or temper flare, and when we're aware of that, then we may be able to be more on guard and watch out for it and control ourselves better. Again, like we said before, respond better when that cannon goes off. So let's read the story and then we'll break it down a little bit. So it's number 5. It's a bit of a longer source, but it's a good story. It's a great story. The sages taught in a Braita in the Talmud. A person should always be patient like Hillel, like the great sage Hillel, and not impatient like Shammai, the great sage Shammai has another story where he acted impatiently. And it says as follows: there was an incident involving 2 people who wagered with each other and said, anyone who will go and aggravate Hillel will take 400 zuz. So basically they made a bet, and the bet was for 400 zuz, which was their currency. It's a $400 bet, basically, right? And if you can get Hillel, the great sage, angry, then I will pay you $400. That was the game. It's a great game. So one of them said, I'll do it. I will aggravate him. I will be the one to get him angry. That day was Shabbat Eve. So it was Friday, and they were preparing. Hillel is home preparing for Shabbos. And he was washing his head, washing his hair. So this man went and passed the entrance to Hillel's house, and he said, who here is Hillel? Who here is Hillel? So I guess, they didn't have as thick walls. Hillel heard the call, and he came out, he wrapped himself up, dragging his bathrobe or whatever, and went out to greet the man. And he said to him, my son, what do you seek? What do you need? By the way, this is typical of some of the great, you don't have to be so great. I mean, all our rabbis are great, but some of these, we can't imagine sometimes how busy our rabbis are. If you're, I don't have a congregation, so my life is easy. But if you're a rabbi of a congregation, you're on call all the time. If you are one of the leaders of the Jewish people, can't even imagine. You've never seen someone who's so busy in your life. There's nobody in the world who's more busy than the greatest rabbis, and that was Hillel. Hillel was the greatest rabbi of his time. He's the busiest guy in the world. And you might think that someone who's the busiest person in the world is sometimes too busy for little irritations. But to be the greatest rabbi, and to be what we call a gadol, someone who's a great person and a leader, it's not just about your knowledge, it's also about your character. And there's some great stories about some of the greats. We've already mentioned Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Rabbi Feinstein was literally the leader of American Jewry he passed away in 1986. So, for 50 years before that, or maybe less, because I think he came to America, maybe about 50 years before that. So he, for example, there's stories in his biography, he would get this woman once came to him. I love this story because it's just so out there. This woman came to him and what was the story? She starts telling, she looked very presentable. She was like this well-dressed, presentable woman. And she asked for an audience with Rabbi Feinstein, and she starts going on about how, I think it was a dream she had, or maybe she didn't say it was a dream, this vision about aliens, and they're coming and they're going to take over. And she's going on and on about the aliens who are coming. And again, we're talking about literally the busiest man in the world. And she's going on and on and on. And he let her go on for 2 hours, telling him about aliens. And, finally, like it was time for it to go. But I think what happened was it started to get dark. And she said she has to be home by dark because of the aliens. So she left. But it's unbelievable. And they asked him, like, how could you waste your time listening to her and her, her talk of aliens? And he said, who else is going to listen to her, right? So that's a gadol. That's a great, someone who it just, it's beyond. So anyways, so Hillel comes out and he says, my son, what do you seek? So he said, I have a question to ask. So he said, okay, ask, my son, ask. So the question was a very important question to disturb Hillel on, in his Shabbos preparations. Why are the heads of Babylonians oval? I'm sure it's bothered everyone here. Why are they, right? So Hillel answered, he said, my son, you have asked a significant question. The reason is because they do not have clever midwives. Okay, I don't think it was a serious answer, but you just, you had to give an answer. The midwives aren't so good at pulling out the babies. So, fine. Then he went and he waited 1 hour and he came back and he said, who here is Hillel? Who here is Hillel? And again, Hillel wrapped himself and went out to greet him. And he said, my son, what do you seek? The man said, I have a question to ask. He said, ask. The man asked, why are the eyes of the residents of Tadmor, which is another place, bleary? So Hillel said, that's a good question, because they live among the sands. Lots of sand gets in their eyes and makes their eyes bleary. Then he went, waited again, same thing, and we'll just jump to the end of that paragraph. As he says, ask, go ahead. Why do Africans have wide feet? So he said to him, it's a good question, because they live in marshlands. Okay, I don't know how good these translations are, but that's the story. It doesn't really matter. The details aren't so important. So finally, the man, right, he's obviously trying very hard to make Hillel angry. He's asking the most ridiculous questions and disturbing him, and he's unsuccessful. So finally, this is on the next page, he said, I have many more questions to ask, but I'm afraid lest you get angry. It might get you angry. So Hillel wrapped himself, sat before him, and he said, all of the questions that you have to ask them, don't worry. So he said, are you Hillel, whom they call the Nasi, the prince of Israel, the leader of Israel? He said to him, yes, that's me. So he said, if it is you, so he cursed him, basically, insulting him, then may there not be many like you in Israel. Right? We shouldn't have other people like you terrible guy, basically. He goes out and he insults him straight to his face. So Hillel said, my son, for what reason? Why are you saying that? So he said, because I lost 400 zuz because of you. Right? I lost my bet. This is right there in the Talmud. So he's fine. So he says, Hillel said to him, be vigilant of your spirit. Hillel is worthy of having you lose 400 zuz and another 400 zuz, and he won't get upset. Basically, I'm not, I don't get upset that easily. That's what he tells him. So it's a great story. It has a great punchline. And, but really, the Talmud is telling us this story and the details, for a reason. And Rabbi Aaron Feldman, in his book on marriage, The River, the Kettle, and the Bird, he points out a number of things here that we can learn from the story, where this man wasn't just like randomly going at this time and to try to aggravate. He had a bet. He had 400 zuz on the line, right? He wanted to do it, to in the perfect conditions to make Hillel angry. So first of all, he comes and he says, who here is Hillel? Who here is Hillel? Now, if you're the leader, everybody knows who you are. Everybody knows where you live, right? He's making it sound like he doesn't even know who he is. He doesn't even know his address. He doesn't know, right? He's an unknown. So he starts off by trying to insult Hillel's pride. That's the first thing. Then he goes, when does he come? Erev Shabbos, right? Right before Shabbos. The preparations are underway. Now, we try to keep it relaxed on Erev Shabbos, but it's a bit of a rush, and depending on the house, things can get pretty, once Shabbos comes in, it's right? And, the next 25 hours of relaxation, but getting ready for Shabbos can sometimes be pretty stressful. And, right, and it's always good to limit that stress as much as possible, but it happens. So he chooses his time carefully, right? When we're under pressure, that's when we can get angry more easily. We have to watch out for that. And not only that, but he gets him. I don't know how he knew this or if he knew this, but we at least learn it from the story, which is that he gets him while he's washing his hair, right? He comes out, his hair is still wet, right? He's definitely uncomfortable, and he's right in the middle of that. And so it's like the undershirt tag, right? He's uncomfortable. It's another moment, another part of the setting that can get the person angry, get Hillel angry. And finally, it's very difficult to control our anger when we feel self-righteous, like we said before, when we're defending the honor of God. Hillel is in the middle of a mitzvah. He's doing a commandment of getting ready for Shabbos, right? And suddenly when we're in the middle of a mitzvah, when we're doing something that's pious and righteous, so we feel justified in retaliating in anger. How dare you disturb me? It's not me. You're disturbing my service of God. Nothing to do with me. I don't care about me, but I'm reacting in defense of God. The honor of God is at stake. But and even if we've trained ourselves, right, to overcome anger, that's when our own ego is affronted. But this isn't me. This is the honor of God. So again, though, right, even though Hillel is involved in a mitzvah, but he's able to, he doesn't let that get him. And he doesn't get angry. And lastly, he repeats it over and over again. So normally aggravation builds, right? It builds up, but even that doesn't get him. And finally, he prepares his insult at the end by attempting to lessen Hillel's motivation for control. And he says, I'm afraid you're going to get angry, which is basically saying that it would be very normal for you to get angry. Hello, okay? Like, right? He's giving him permission to get angry, basically. And despite that, he still doesn't get angry. And then he builds up Hillel's pride. He says, are you the famous and great Hillel? Right? Because when our pride is high, that's when an insult strikes the hardest. So he gets him, and he says, are you the great Hillel, the leader of all the Jewish people? Well, there shouldn't be another one like you in Israel. And that's, again, an opportunity to get him angry, and he doesn't. So all of these things are important for us. Not, again, like I said, like the commentators point out, we can't necessarily all be like Hillel. But it's so important to be aware of what scenarios have can and will aggravate us, or will we be susceptible to becoming angry. And that's if we're under pressure, right? It's Erev Shabbos, we're preparing for Shabbos. If we are uncomfortable, physically uncomfortable, if our pride has been built up and then we're insulted, all of these are scenarios where we could easily come to anger. And it's so important to be aware of that, because if we're aware of it, then we will have greater control over it. So just to wrap it up again, as I said, next week we'll talk more about the detriments of anger, how it's so destructive and so futile. We'll talk about some strategies for overcoming anger. But for today, to summarize, we spoke about how it's within our control, right? We're not set in a certain way. We can develop ourselves. We can even if we have a tendency, but we can overcome that. And it's important. What else did we say? We have to be able to be tolerant of the little things. That's the first step. And then to be aware of the things that I wouldn't say are the tiny aggravations, but a little bit bigger. Things that are a little bit bigger, but to be aware of them. And if we're aware of them, then we can more easily, respond to them and respond without getting angry. Okay.
Okay.
Have a
Thank you,
great
Rabbi.
night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi Shams.
My pleasure.
Lila Tov.